In this model, we would be discussing about what are the different models of addiction, to understand what is an addiction out here, and different models of addiction would be about biological model of addiction, evolutionary model of addiction, cognitive theory of addiction, learning theories which are involved in addictions, psychosocial, spiritual model of addiction which is involved, and rational developmental model of addictions will also be discussed in this model. In the previous module, we have explored the concept of addiction and various substances that cause daily life addictions. In the present module, we will focus on different theoretical modules explaining the causes of addiction. Since we are already with the idea of addiction, we already have an idea of addiction. Still, for a recap, addiction is a global problem that causes various physical, psychological hazards and take millions of lives each year. Addiction is viewed to be a compulsive physiological and psychological need for a substance causing clinically significant impairments in life. These impairments could have an impact on you. You could be physically, psychologically affected by these addiction symptoms. There are various definitions that can explain addictions and emphasize on different components such as tolerance, withdrawal symptoms, or even loss of control, when it does not occur essentially in every form of addiction. There would be differences in people experiencing these addiction problems. Every definition serves a purpose. So, in case of addiction, since a broad definition may lack certain aspects integrity, we may have different definitions to explain varied situations or addictions. Let's now focus, hence our focus should be on the present module. We will focus on important modules and explain the process of addiction out here. Models of addictions, let's start with that, so that it's easier for you to understand with the backhand memory of what addiction was. It's easier for you to comprehend the models of addiction out here. A model is taken as a comprehensive mapping of the plausible interplay of various factors that may cause addiction. Each of the models emphasize on specific variables which may play a dominant role in producing dependence on a substance or a behavioral response. In an attempt to analyze the causes of any addictive behavior, a particular model may just seem as an appropriate explanation, whereas in other areas or other cases, an elective approach of various models must justify the cause. So, let's start with biological model of addiction, which we will be taking in the first module out here. According to this perspective, the cause of addiction lies in the biological mechanisms such as brain chemistry, neurochemicals imbalances, or genetic predispositions. The model views a process of addiction as a brain disease in which neural pathways of executive functions become distorted, along with amplifications of associated motivational process. The distortions occurs as a result of interplay or interactional play between behavior and effects of brain after ingestions of a certain substance. The imperative role of reward pathways and neural circuits in brain causing addictions was proposed by Brewer and Potenza in 2008. There are various areas of brains with specific functions that are involved in addictions. They would be these specific areas of the brain are amygdala, orbitofrontal cortex, and these areas basically are important in controlling emotional aspects of motivation stimuli and other neural or neutral stimuli. Let's discuss about the nucleus ambiguus which is involved in the expressions of learned behavior and interpreting of motivational stimuli considered as pleasurable for the brain. In case of addiction, as factors that reinforce the addiction process such as stress increase, certain changes in the structure and functions of the brain regions is observed, which further promotes the addictive behavior. Also, we can see in the advanced stages of addiction, the reinforcing pleasurable influence is believed to be to move from ventral to the dorsal structures of stratum, which play a strong role in the brain formation or habit formation. This can also be seen in a structure of a brain when we are explaining about how the decreased metabolism is there and increased metabolism is reflected. The model also attempts to answer certain questions of individual differences in acquisition of addiction. The approach also suggests that interactional forces between genetics and environment influence the acquisition of addictive behavior and also the type of substance addictions. So generally we can say there are role of genetics and environment which is playing a major role in addictions, and the role of genetics is highlighted in the acquisition and heritability of addictive behavior, which has also been estimated to be around 30% to 50% again by Potenza in 2008. The next module which we would be discussing here is evolutionary model of addiction. Let's see what is an addictive behavior. Addictive behavior is generally conceptualized as a byproduct of biological, psychological and sociological influences. However, exploring the evolutionary basis of addiction becomes imperative as all the major influences are closely linked with the evolutionary origins. To understand such basis also becomes important, so that rather than only focusing on the physiological and environmental causes, we can also uncover the evolutionary underpinnings of addiction as a global epidemic. It also enhances our understanding towards the question of individual and cultural differences in addiction which might exist. The evolutionary perspective states drug use, addictive behavior to be a part of the mammalian world since the ancient time. Motivation for addiction comes from a reward system located within the brain, negotiating between the like and want for a substance. The initial like for substances later transforms into strong want of the same, carrying high survival value. Evolutionarily speaking, performance or performing such pleasurable desires was thought as a sign of adaptation, as it enhanced the survival value such as eating or sex. It was considered as a natural inclination towards desire for pleasure. So all these things were related to the brain and how they are linked to your body. However, in recent times, with all technological advancement which are happening around us, survival is not a pertinent question, and thus addiction does not carry an adaptive value. Nevertheless, working on the idea of pleasure, addiction is believed to enhance the motivational reward structures and decrease the negative, painful emotions which could be or such as anger, guilt, etc. At times, such external acting of pleasure may be so rewarding for a person that it may even deviate the person from natural, intrinsically rewarding systems or drives of hunger to thirst and sex. One thing that remains unchanged in evolutionary model or evolutionary age is that in recent times is that substance addiction is hazardous to health and depicts long-term physiological and psychological deficits. Now let's understand the third model, which is your cognitive theory of addiction. This model is also very important as it gives a view about addiction as a result of faulty information processing of the addiction related to your stimuli. Dysfunctional beliefs and erroneous decision making is believed to be at the epicenter of this model. So if you make decisions which are not correct enough and the information processing is not appropriate enough, then also it is related to addiction, as cognition basically deals with learning, memory, thinking, beliefs. So all these things are part of your cognitive system. The cognitive postulates that thoughts, beliefs, your experiences or your expectations influence emotions and behavior, which strongly suggests that importance of accurate information processing is causing vulnerability to addiction. Since addiction is also a behavior, so understanding underlying thoughts and belief pattern is believed to play a very important role in causing and maintaining such kind of a behavior. The perspective out here also further suggests that Biases in information processing led to positive emotions or lead to positive emotions that reinforce addictive behavior further on. For instance, let's take an example. In case of attentional bias, the addict may seem to pay more attention to the stimuli related to substance than any other neutral stimuli in comparison to non-addicts. Similar effect is also seen in terms of memory biases, where the addict may be very differentially recall the positive effects of the alcohol abuse and motivationally forget the related or adverse effects which may affect your selection or selective attention processes for alcohol related stimuli, such as hoarding for a shop, and may relatively remember it out for all the events across the journey. So, in this module, in cognitive module, it also explains that addiction as a result of cognitive discrepancy within an individual, it is basically that individual is going through. It proposes that two conflictual thoughts create discrepancies and disharmony, and as a result of individual attempts to measure to reduce this dissonance as closely as possible. So, we continuously fight amongst, there is a fight which is going within our system to rectify these thoughts so that we are in a normal state to think properly. In case of addiction, let's see, such as one's alcohol consumption is majorly affecting the occupational performance and efficiency of the individual, as obviously the thought process is being changed. So, when you perform, the performance is actually decreased. The performance level, the arousal level is decreased because it is having an effect. The effect is there of addiction within the system of a person or the individual. In general way, observed by addicts and to deal with dissonance is to deny the existence of a problem and aggravate and exaggerate the positive effects of negative outcomes of the addiction. So, the person is not ready to understand that yes, he or she has a problem and continuously stress that it is leading to some positive effect within them. In acute circumstances, they also tend to depict and accept themselves as hopeless addicts and thus ignore implicit responsibilities which are there as part of their own profile. That substance abuse treatment and prevention policies are being formulated, which helps in decreasing this level of addiction and which also leads to self-efficacy within the person. If self-efficacy is there, then coping resources would be more. The person would be ready to accept the changes which are there. Thus, this is what our cognitive theory was all about. Now, let me come to the next theory and explain you about what is learning theory of addiction. These theories of addictions have been based on purely on experimentations on the non-human species, with self-conscious thinking like humans is not involved. As the statement suggests, we are not dealing with humans out there, but yes, non-human species are being taken into account for experimentations. When these results are approved from there, we try and apply to humans also. The theory proposes addiction as a result of learning and forming associations between cues, responses and positive and negative reinforcements. So, all these factors do play a role in our life. Addiction thus emerges as a result of rewarding or powerful experience such as pleasure, happiness and avoidance of negative stimuli, which could be your anxiety, your tension, sorrows, etc., and mediated by motivational needs such as desires, wishes, wants, etc. So, all these aspects are related to learning theory. Now, in learning theory, there is another aspect out here which is operant conditioning, and it is the general learning theory which focuses on role of positive and negative reinforcers in increasing or decreasing the likelihood of occurrence of behavior. Positive reinforcers are those events that increase the likelihood of occurrence of behavior. Let's take an example to explain this statement. The pleasantry effect or a euphoric mood induced after injection of cocaine may increase the probability of repetition of such behavior, because you would be elated. That mood swing, that happiness which you experience, you would like to repeat that behavior of yours again and again, as it is leading to some positive effect. On the other hand, if we take the negative effect or the negative reinforcers, are events that terminate or avoid noxious or negative stimuli. For instance, an addict may continue to use heroin to avoid its negative strong withdrawal symptoms. So we can see both the effects out here, where positive is trying to reinforce the same behavior and negative out here is trying to decrease the behavior which is giving you some kind of pain. So withdrawal symptoms is like a pain for a person who is an addicted out here, and that person tries to avoid that pain by taking drugs. Let's understand with classical conditioning. Earlier we had taken operant, now let's take what is classical in learning. Classical conditioning theory has also been used to explain addictive behavior. The perspective out here proposes association between stimuli and reflexive responses, where the stimuli is closely predictive of another motivationally rich stimuli. And this was basically given by the work of Mook in 1995. Hence, normal stimuli such as party may become motivationally significant when it gets associated with the use of drugs like cocaine, which may soothe strong biological, psychological pressures and anxieties. So you tend to intake these kind of substances, foreign substances, to actually elevate your mood and to relieve you from all the anxieties and pain. Insensitive sensitization theory also aims to explain the addictive behavior similar to ecological or etiological perspective. The theory proposed that increased frequency of self-administered drugs may cause certain neuroadaptations of the stimuli, which further reinforces the behavior not as a result of like but rather as a want. It also emphasizes on the fact that with repeated use of the drug, the body basically develops a tolerance and consume the substances. Hence, the substance which depends on the liking of it, but rather a biological want of the body. Imitation theories have also suggested that addiction to occur as a result of imitation of behavior patterns and assimilations of ideas and identities. Addiction as a behavior may be acquired from direct exposure to the ideas and behaviors of models. So it entirely depends from person to person out here. As it is also called modeling or observational learning, it strongly focuses on the identification of the addict in terms of behavior and ideology with the models expressing such behaviors. Social learning theory is another theory on learning module, and this theory suggests the role of both observations and cognitions in learning of addictive behavior. The motivation to imitate models is strongly mediated by the equation of rewards and punishments that the model receives. This also determines the strength and frequency of occurrences of addictive behavior. Another perspective, in contrast to reward-punishment equation, suggested automatic imitations of the behavior as stimulus-response compatibility. It rejected the importance of reward and punishment as received by the model, but rather focused on association without even being aware of it. Hence, learning theories focus on importance of associations formed between stimuli and response and mediating role of cognition and implicit social structures in it. The fifth theory of models of addiction is developmental model of addiction. Human development marks both biological growth and psychological maturity. The developmental model views addiction as a result of psychological immaturity or arrested growth. Development marks the capacity to control unjustified impulses and work according to the priorities make judgments which are based on logical and abstract reasoning. Meaning are also there in their lives and view themselves that their actions are holistic in perspective. A developmental delay thus may cause acting upon selfish desires, making impulsive, irrational decisions, dealing with meaninglessness in life, and to also have an incomplete view of their own self. So in a way, they are actually not self-efficacy is being lacking in these people. Developmental model of addiction, genetics are playing a role, behavior of a person plays a role, and environment, whereas physiological factors also play a role, which we had discussed in the later sections. According to developmental perspective, an addict goes through the following stages while recovering from the abuse of the substance. Transition is the first stage, the continuous period for the addict to realize that now safe use of substance is no more possible. Stabilization, this stage where individual encounters withdrawal symptoms and plans how to avoid precipitating places or events. Third is the early recovery, the stage where individual desires to live a chemical-free lifestyle and recover the loss of relationships that promotes absenteeism. Middle recovery, continuing form of success of early recovery, where individual aims to sustain with chemical-free life and balanced lifestyle. Fifth is your late recovery, the stage where the individual rehabilitates completely to the society and aims to restructure the dysfunctional beliefs about own self that acted as a catalyst to the process of addiction. Fifth, we have discussed. Now let's come to the sixth, which is the maintenance. Most imperative state where the individual develops capacity to refrain from the use in substance in most stressful circumstances and preserve the reconstructed relations and the view of own self. Therefore, the developmental model thus places deep importance onto achievements of cognitive milestones and biological strength to deal and resist the person, the self in the complex nexus of addiction. Sixth module out here would be the rational choice model of addiction. This model proposes that addiction emerges as a result of rational choice made after constant negotiating, reflecting the positive outcomes of addictive behavior. The choice is based on rational reasons and analysis of the cost and benefits of addictive behavior. Most of the addicts outweigh benefits that cost of addiction. The benefits are based entirely on expectations or probabilities arising out of the likelihood of the outcomes of addiction. This perspective completely emphasizes on the expectations or utilities that one perspective in the choice of addiction. For example, after consuming alcohol, an individual enjoys the pleasantry effects and places low values over the depreciating health or rift in interpersonal problems, then of course he is outweighing benefits over the cost of alcohol use and paving way for its addiction. In this way, most of the addictive behavior is caused by the result of higher perceived utilities than evaluated harm. Theory of planned behavior as derived from theory of reasoned action is also explains addiction in terms of rational choices. The perspective also proposes that choices of an behavior is dependent upon three factors, primarily such as analysis of subjective expected utility, perceived control over the situations, and expectations of significant others from us. Thus, we can say all the above theories focus on choice of addiction made rationally and logically by the individual and hence ignores addiction as a result of biological predispositions or learned behavior. Seventh and the last module out here is Biopsycho Spiritual Model of Addiction. This model has developed as an extension to widely accepted biopsychosocial model of causation and treatment. BPS model focuses on interaction between biological, psychological and sociological factors in development of an behavior. It states that any abnormality is an interactional play of biological factors such as genetic predispositions, neurochemical imbalances, psychological dysfunctions and even sociological components, which could be your society, family, peer groups, norms. Each of these factors does not operate in isolation but rather are codependent on each other. Hence, the treatment also has to target all the factors rather than focusing only on biological or psychological factors. We can see in the model also how the biological addiction has affected your biological factors, which could be genetics, neurochemistry, which we have discussed, sociological factors, which could be your peer groups, your family, your interpersonal relationships, your spiritual, which would be meaningfulness, purpose in life, and psychological, which would be your learning, memory, emotions, etc. So this constitutes a biosocial spiritual model. Now let's come to the summary, what all we have understood in this model. Let's try and recap what we have done in this module. Addiction is viewed to be compulsive physiological and psychological need for a substance causing clinically significantly impairments in life. A model is considered as a comprehensive mapping of the plausible interplay of various factors that cause addiction. Biological model views addiction as a brain disease in which neural pathways of executive functions become distorted along with amplifications of associated motivational process. The evolutionary model proposes drug use and addictive behavior to be a part of mammalian world since ancient times, and motivation of addiction comes from the reward system associated with this brain negotiating link. Cognitive model views addiction arising from faulty information processing, dysfunctional beliefs, decision making which are erroneous, and its robust relationships of maladapted beliefs. Learning theories view addiction as associations between cues, response, mediating positive negative reinforcers and imitations of models. Developmental model views addiction as a result of psychological immaturity or arrested growth, genetic vulnerability, physiological state, psychological factors, stress, personality type, environmental influences. All these are related to developmental model. Then is your rational choice module, which proposes addiction to emerge as a result of rational choice made after constant negotiation reflecting the positive outcomes of the addictive behavior. Biopsychosocial spiritual model explains addiction as a loss of connection with this spiritual anchor interacting with biological, psychological, sociological components of self. And recovery, which is the major part in addiction, which emerges to be extremely complex and subject to vulnerabilities. Such challenges must be understood by the therapist, and special considerations on women and children should be placed.